How's it going, everybody? So this is the part two of the kind of just summarizing all of the information that we know about Kamen Rider Revice before the series starts. So last part we talked about just all the characters and some plot information, and with this part I'm going to be talking more about the specifics of the Revice writer system and the Vi-Stamps and how all of that works. And funnily enough, in between recording the first part and now recording this part, new information has come out, and it actually fits well into what I was already going to be talking about with this video, so I'm going to cover it here. Yeah, and it's actually a good thing to start this topic off with because it actually gives more details about how the Revice driver works and how the Vi-Stamps were created. So yeah, it's just a little information blurb here talking about George Karasaki, who is of course the character that has created the Revice driver. And it says that about 30 years ago, his father actually created the first type of stamp. Now, it just says stamp. It doesn't say specifically that it is a Vi-Stamp. But it says that the type of stamp that Karasaki's father created is used to separate the devil that lives in the human body. And to me, that certainly sounds similar to the type of stamp that the Dead Man's organization are, using, and they're like giving it to people and using that to summon more of the Dead Man monsters. But anyway, and it says that George's father wished for him to continue his research, and so George has done that and has now created the Revice driver and the Vi-Stamps, and here it does specifically say Vi-Stamps, so it's possible that the other type of stamp that is used to just separate the devils from the human is, it may be called something else, some other type of stamp. But yeah, and it says the intention of the Revice driver and the Vi-Stamps is a system that mixes the devil, in quotes, inside the human body, and it mixes it with the, quote, memory of genes of powerful biological species that reside in the human body to make it more capable. And it goes on to say, by using the Revice driver, it is possible to convert a Vi-Stamp with an unknown power into its own power. And then it has, in quotes, control the devil with the devil. Can this system really save humanity? Oh, and it does also say that George specifically developed the Revice writer system for the purpose of fighting against Dead Man's. But yeah, and that actually kind of gives us our furthest point on the I guess the Kamen Rider Revice timeline. The fact that George's father created the first Vi-Stamp 30 years ago. Which, well, I mean, I guess technically the furthest time point that we know of is that the Kamen Rider franchise started 50 years ago because it's just an entertainment franchise in the Revice universe. Which, actually, interesting note, 30 years ago, that would be 1991. So that would actually be kind of the era where, there was no Kamen Rider for a little bit. Because, or at least not on, a screen. Because, Black RX ended in, 89, and then Shin Kamen Rider doesn't start until, I think 92. But I'm actually going to look this up. Hang on. Okay, yeah, it looks like there was some sort of maybe a Black RX manga or something that was still out and running in 91. But yeah, like I said, no Kamen Rider on the screen. So Kamen Rider wasn't completely gone in that year, but it was only there like a little bit. And then talking about how the Vi-Stamps work with the memory of genes of other species that are, like the memory of these genes are already in the human body. Like I've seen similar things to that in other sci-fi stuff. Like basically the idea of, if you have the scientific know-how, you could hypothetically look at the human genome, and because every creature on Earth, their DNA is made of all the same basic components, you could kind of extrapolate from the human genome what the genetics of every other creature on Earth might be like. That being said, you could end up with just like crazy non-existent ones doing that. Or there's I think it's the X-Men, or at least one of the X-Men universes, where pretty much the explanation for all the mutant powers is that technically the genetics for all of the mutant powers already exists in human DNA. The only difference is that the X gene, the mutant gene, changes how the genetics are expressed. And so, like, if you have a mutant whose mutation is that they have particularly like animalistic traits, the explanation is pretty much that, like, oh well, these genes already exist in the human body. This is kind of like just dormant genes that, this is what humans could be like if they had went down a different evolutionary path, something like that. Pretty much just the most extreme idea of, basically if a species had a trait in the past and they don't anymore, it's not because they don't have the genetics for it anymore. Like, the genes are still in their DNA. It's just that they're dormant. They're not being expressed anymore. It's like dominant and recessive genes. You have, take two parents with dark hair and they end up having a child with light hair. And, it's kind of like, well, how'd this happen? But then, it's like, oh, well, one of the great-grandparents had blonde hair. But, yeah, it sounds like the Revice Driver is going to be operating on a similar concept. It's just, instead, the recessive genes that it's activating are for things like, claws and fangs and scales. Now, moving on to just some of the details I've noticed from the trailers about how the stamps work and the rider system works. I'm going to start with the Vi-Stamps, and I'm actually going to start by talking about how the Deadmans use them. Now, we haven't seen that very much in the trailers. Like, we haven't seen how Olteca and Julio transform. We haven't seen how the Deadman are summoned from humans. The only time we've really seen them use the stamps in a trailer is to summon henchmen, which I don't think we even have like an official name yet for the Deadman henchmen. But basically, Olteca just stamps the ground, and we see this kind of red glowing like magic ritual circle, alchemy circle expand out from it, and then it's like these giant like literal pieces of paper with writing on them, and then like red seals down at the bottom just kind of like come up from it. So a very kind of, I guess you could say, the typical idea of a contract, when you picture that in your head of what a contract might look like. And like when I say giant pieces of paper, I mean these things are about 5-6 feet tall, and then they just kind of evaporate into this black smoke, and then the black smoke condenses and just becomes the Deadman henchman. And at least in the trailer, the stamp that Olteka uses to summon them, it looks extremely different from the stamps that Revi and Vice use. It's basically solid white. It has some kind of carving on it, but you can't really tell what it is. And it almost looks, it doesn't even really look like it's made out of the same material. Like, the stamp that Olteka uses, it almost looks like it's made out of bone or something like that. But then in other images that have come out, we've seen Olteka, the stamp that he's handing out to people to get them to summon like their own dead man out of themselves. That stamp, it looks a lot more like the type of stamp that Revi and Vice use. The stamp that he was seen giving out it's very clearly the spider Vi-Stamp. It's got, clearly a red spider on it, and it's a blue background. And, that's got people speculating. It's like, okay, is this the type of stamp that Revi and Vice can use to transform? Does this stamp have a rider associated with it? And, people were kind of looking at it and saying, okay, it's red and blue. It could be the stamp that's associated with Build. But also looking at it, you can't really see the image of a rider behind the spider. So, it's possible that it's not one of the regular Vice stamps, or I should say central Vice stamps. That's what, like, the main ones that Revi and Vice use in like official like press materials and stuff like that. They're being referred to as central Vice stamps, or at least in this one official press thing. Which this translation, it may be a little bit off, but moving on to Revi and Vice, I kind of want to quickly dig into how we see them using the stamps and like the details that we can notice in their transformation, and see what we can figure out from it. Which we've actually seen two different styles of transformation out of Revi and Vice already. There's the one from the trailer, and then there's the one from the kind of the short film episode 0 type thing that was released. And they're similar, but there are some also big differences between the two. Okay, so first, in both versions, Iki will take the Revice Driver and touch it to the front of his waist, and it will flash and it'll flash the number 50 out in front of it, and it will announce Revice Driver. Now in the short film version, you can actually see the belt come out of the driver and wrap around his waist. And in the trailer version, there's just kind of a flash of light and the belt's already around his waist. Which I'm curious what the in-series significance of the number 50 is going to be. Like, obviously Revice is the 50th anniversary of the series, but 50 is such a big motif within the series already with the equipment. The Revice Driver having the 50 on it and flashing it when Iki puts it on. And then you have his weapons, the Ohin Buster 50, the Gunphone 50. So I'm really curious, like, what the significance in series of the number 50 is. And, but anyway, then Iki will take out the Rex Vi-Stamp. He then, notably, it seems like he waits for Vice to go back inside his body in both versions. And then once Vice is back inside, then Iki will press the button that is on the top of the Vi-Stamp, and, for the Rex Vi-Stamp, it'll announce Rex. And then this is where the two different versions divide. So in the trailer version, nothing really happens after this. In the short film version, this sort of, once he presses the button on the Vi-Stamp, this sort of like holographic screen appears behind him, and it looks like Iki and Vice are text messaging back and forth on this screen. And, you know, it's clearly not anything that they're saying out loud, but, you know, from what I can read of it and translate, you know, it's stuff like Vice saying, you know, stamp it fast. You know, basically almost like instructions of how to operate the driver. But and then Iki's saying like, I know. So it almost seems like it's like telepathic conversation that they're having. Is what this text messaging back and forth is. And then in both versions, Iki will then blow on the base of the Vi-Stamp, which I'm wondering if they're not going to say that that is like some sort of, you know, biometric thing. Like the Vi-Stamp needs to like scan his DNA or something before he can use it. And then, you know, Iki will stamp the pad, and that'll start the driver playing the standby music. And in the trailer version, once he does that, Vice will come back out of his body and kind of start flying around. In the short film version, Vice comes out of his body carrying a giant purple Vi-Stamp. Whereas in the trailer version, when Vice is flying around, you see kind of this like dim red glow start in his torso. It's very brief, and then it's like he just kind of like reaches into that and like materializes this like completely clear Vi-Stamp, and then it like just grows to this, you know, giant 8-10 foot tall size. And then once it's at the full size, you see the stamp kind of like fill with like this purple liquid. And then in both versions, Iki will then, of course, say Henshin, and then he'll put the Vi-Stamp in the slot where it goes on the driver and then pull it like a lever. And in the trailer version, this puts like a kind of like, I guess, an energy projection type of thing of the stamp's emblem behind Iki. And in the short film version, it kind of adds a big thing of the stamp's emblem onto like their text message conversation board. It gets added to it almost like a big emoji is kind of what it looks like. But it also looks like, you know, you have a back and forth negotiation between two parties and then what is effectively a seal on it. So now it looks like a contract, which is just an interesting thing to note. And then in both versions, at the same time that, you know, Iki hits the lever, Vice will also, you know, slam the giant Vi-Stamp that he's carrying down onto Iki, and then, you know, and then Iki is in there. Basically, it kind of invokes the imagery that you often see in sci-fi stuff of, you know, someone being in like, you know, a chamber of, you know, vague science liquid and being experimented on. At least that's just kind of what it looks like to me. And I should also note that in the short film version, also when Iki hits the lever, it quickly shows like an X-ray of human heart, and, you know, it starts out looking blue, but then like a pulse goes through it and it turns pink. So I think that is kind of showing that, you know, the transformation process, it is affecting Iki like biologically, at least on some level. But yeah, and then in both versions, you know, once Iki is in the Vi-Stamp, you then see the liquid that is in the Vi-Stamp kind of condensing onto him and, you know, forming his Kamen Rider suit. The process, it almost resembles, I think, like injection molding, or I think it's called blow molding. And in the short film version, you know, we get a close-up of this process, and we can kind of see, like, glowing DNA helixes going around him while the armor is forming. We don't really see that in the trailer version. And in both versions, while the armor is forming onto Iki, the T-Rex stamp that is, or like the holographic one that's behind him, it's like pulsing out energy. Now, of course, in the trailer version, it's by itself, and in the short film version, it's on the big text message wall. And then once the armor finishes forming on Iki, the stamp behind him will kind of condense into the parts of the armor for Kamen Rider Vice, and they will gather up on Vice and form his body. And then the giant Vice stamp, it'll like shatter like glass, and any of the excess purple liquid just kind of like just floods out everywhere, but then disappears. It kind of reminds me of Kamen Rider Rogue's transformation from Build. But yeah, that's pretty much Revi and Vice's transformation. It has me really curious to see like what the details about their suit is going to end up saying. Main takeaways for me just from watching it, it looks like the transformation is definitely affecting Iki on like some sort of like biological level. At the very least, it's like increasing like his adrenaline or his nervous system or something. And then, of course, there's the image of the genetics, so it may be like genetically modifying him. But yeah, and certainly it's very clear that Iki is being empowered by whatever the material inside the Vice stamp is, whereas Vice is being empowered by the stamp, the seal of the contract. Basically, he's being empowered by the contract. So it's just interesting for me that even with it being the same transformation process, they are both being empowered by different aspects of it. And then as far as the other ways that we see Revi and Vice use the Vice stamps, of course the other Vice stamps allow them to access different transformations. Yeah, like their transformations are called genomes. So like their base form is Rex genome. And then we've already seen in both the trailer and the short film, they use the Megalodon Vice stamp, and it turns them into the Megalodon genome. Or rather, it gives them the Megalodon genome armor. But then we also have already seen Vice stamps that it looks like it may not transform both of them. Like with the Pterosaur Vice stamp, it looks like that only transforms Vice, and it, instead of like giving him new armor, it transforms him into a hover bike, basically. So I guess it could be possible that the same stamp could be used in multiple different ways. Like that may just be, the hover bike may just be one use of the Pterosaur stamp, and then Revi and Vice may also have like a genome armor form with it or something like that. But that has yet to be seen. And then, of course, with it being the 50th anniversary of Rider, all of the central Vice stamps, they have a past Kamen Rider associated with them. And, it is in series. The explanation for that is literally just that George is a big fan of Kamen Rider. But, so yeah, the armors just look like old Kamen Riders. They don't really have any similar powers, though. It seems like all of their power just comes from, the animal that they're associated with. Which, I'm on this topic, I'm going to quickly just go down the list of basically all of the main Vice stamps, what animal they are, what rider they're associated with, and, roughly when they're going to come out, roughly what episode of the show we should be seeing them in. Because we have that information now, thanks to, toy lists, confirmations, and things like that. So, first is, you would think it'd be the Rex stamp, but it's actually the Megalodon stamp. On the toy list, it's listed as link item A. And, it of course is associated with Kamen Rider Decade. That's something we already covered. And it was the Megalodon stamp was like the kind of pre-series promotional item that released a bit early. And then the Rex stamp is releasing packaged with the Revice Driver, and it's going to be releasing early September. And there's also the version that also comes with the Grasshopper, the Bata stamp. And the Bata stamp is associated with Kamen Rider Ichigo. And we haven't really seen like what it's going to do, but we do know that it exists in the show. The Bata stamp, it briefly showed up in the trailer for just like a brief flash. And the way they showed it, it seems like it may have some type of importance. And then link item B on the toy list is the Eagle Vi-Stamp, and it is associated with Kamen Rider Double. And it's packaged with the Vi-Stamp holders. And it's already been shown that the Eagle Vi-Stamp is going to allow Revi and Vice to access the Eagle genome armor. And then link item C on the toy list has now been revealed to be the Mammoth Vi-Stamp, and it is associated with Kamen Rider Den-O. And because of, we've already got a picture of the toy packaging, so we can see that it's going to allow Revi and Vice to access the Mammoth genome form. And then link item D on the toy list is the Pterosaur Vi-Stamp that we've already talked about, some it turning Vice into a hover bike. But it is associated with Kamen Rider Fies. So, who knows if we're going to see any additional an armor, actual transformation out of it. While we are in September on the toy list, though, also releasing at this time is the Ohin Buster 50 weapon and the Gunphone 50 weapon. And so that's all the relevant stuff that's coming out in September. So the first month of the show, your first 4 episodes, roughly, that's all you're going to see in the show. The driver, the 2 weapons, the hover bike, and then, the Rex form, Megalodon, Eagle, and Mammoth, possibly Pterosaur, and that's it. Going into October, what was link item E on the toy list has been revealed to be the Lion Vi-Stamp, and it's associated with Kamen Rider Kuuga. And then link item F is the Jackal Vi-Stamp, and it's associated with Kamen Rider X-Aid, and it is packaged with the what they call the Vi-Stamp bar, which is like the basically the link item holder for the series, or not holder, but the storage for the series. And then link item G has been revealed to be the Kong Vi-Stamp, and it's associated with Kamen Rider Forza. And then the link item H is the Kamakiri Vi-Stamp, or the Mantis Vi-Stamp, and it is associated with Kamen Rider Gaim. And that is it for October as far as Vi-Stamps go. So, Lion, Jackal, Kong, and Mantis, we're probably going to be seeing those in episodes 5 through 9. Which at this point, it seems like the show seems to be averaging, releasing about one stamp per episode. Which that makes me a little bit skeptical that absolutely every single one of these is going to allow Revi and Vice to transform. I mean, it's not out of the question though. There is one rumor though that the Jackal stamp, its transformation for Vice is just going to be transforming him into a skateboard. So there could also just be really weird ones like that. But yeah, and as we get into November, things get less clear. We don't really have as many details on things. It's back to just the vagueness of the toy list. But the last thing we do know is that link item I from the toy list, it is actually the Brachio Vi-Stamp that is associated with Kamen Rider Geo. And according to one older rumor, the Geo Vi-Stamp is going to allow access to the giant robot for the series. And with it being the Brachio, which, of course, well-known, largest dinosaur, that seems more reliable. Yeah, and the Brachio stamp, it's coming out the second week of November. So show-wise, you should be seeing it around episode 11, assuming they don't take a break for a week for some weird reason. Now, going further into November, according to the toy listing, which possible spoilers beyond this point, we have characters that are labeled as Second Rider A, Second Rider B, and Buddy Rider B showing up. So it's possible that I think it's probably just one secondary rider with two different forms that are, I guess, equally important. There's one rumor about the secondary rider being he having one form that's Kamen Rider Live and one form that's Kamen Rider Evil. And for Buddy Rider B, I guess the secondary rider may have his own partner or devil partner, because Vice in the toy list is labeled as Buddy Rider A. And we know because of the toy list that this secondary rider, or possibly secondary riders, they do have a different driver from the Revice Driver. And according to the toy listing, it comes with just one Vi-Stamp. And we have no idea what Vi-Stamp it is really, but rumor is it's supposed to be the Bat Vi-Stamp. Now, as far as what Kamen Rider it's associated with, again, no way of knowing. There's also one rumor that, and it's an older rumor, that one of the riders in Revice is supposed to have forms that are based on evil riders, and the example they gave specifically is Kamen Rider Ruga. So that kind of leads, if we combine that with the live and evil rumor, that kind of makes me think that it might be associated with Kamen Rider Ryuki, and so when they're in live form, their form is based on Ryuki. But if they're in evil form, it's based on Ruga. And that also fits with, the mirror motif of the Kamen Rider Ryuki season. But again, that's all just rumor and speculation. The only thing that we know 100% is that, in November, we're getting a secondary rider with two different forms. However, one other piece of confirmed information. We know that Ikki's brother, Daiji, is going to be transforming into a Kamen Rider at some point during the series. This has been confirmed. That it was said kind of just offhandedly during the announcement press conference. So, and when that happened, that was, it could have been a joke then, because it was said like a joke. But there has now since been other press materials and things like that have come out and reconfirmed it and backed it up that yes, Daiji is going to be transforming into a Kamen Rider. So the fact that we're hearing about it so early, that suggests that he could be the secondary rider. Now we don't know for sure that he's the secondary rider. He could be the Tri-Terry rider or something like that. But Daiji is definitely going to be a Kamen Rider. And then also confirmed by the toy list, in December, Revice is getting his first major power-up form. And I can't remember if this is a rumored name or a confirmed name, but I remember seeing something about his power-up form being called Baruto Rex, which Baruto is apparently the Spanish onomatopoeia for the sound that a trumpet makes. So basically, it's like a trumpeting T-Rex, whatever that means. So it's just a very odd name, and it's very strange. And that's all we really have on the confirmed toys and Vi-Stamps and all of that. That being said, a lot of the animals and the writers that they are associated with for all of these Vi-Stamps, it came out in a rumor like well before any of it was official information. So that, that of course leads to believe like, okay, this rumor was correct. But there's other Vi-Stamps on this rumor list that, haven't been shown officially yet still. One of them is the Owl Vi-Stamp, and it's supposed to be associated with Kamen Rider Wizard, and it is said to be used by the Tritary Rider. And then another one of the rumored Vi-Stamps on this list is the Bear Vi-Stamp, and it's associated with Kamen Rider Kabuto. Now here's where things get a little bit more interesting. We've recently got new, really high quality detail looks at Olteca and Julio's monster forms. Julio's monster form looks like a mixture of a Kabuto beetle and a bear. And it looks like he may also have like an alternate monster form, sort of. And, it's kind of looking like that could be a comparison between, Kabuto's masked form and rider form. So it looks like it might be possible that Julio may use the bear Vi-Stamp that is associated with Kabuto to transform. And then that also got people looking at Olteca, and his animal motif is very clearly, a squid or an octopus or something like that. But he's also got, a hood and a horn on his head. And so people are looking at that and kind of like, he could be the squid Vi-Stamp, and it might be associated with Kamen Rider Ghost. So it's very interesting. And that would kind of suggest that the Vi-Stamps that they're using to transform, if they're associated with riders, that indicates that they were made by George. But this video is running really long, so I'm going to wrap it up here. Thank you all for listening. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.